In today's character profile, we're going to be looking at a cartoon character who was quite unique in his day, and kind of still is. While the likes of Disney, Warner Brothers, and Universal tended to gravitate towards animals for their animated shorts, UPA decided to create an original human to center cartoon escapades on. The result was Mr. Magoo, who started life as a political statement and then morphed into just a funny codger we'd happily welcome into our movie palaces and living rooms. Mr. Magoo made his screen debut in the 1949 short The Ragtime Bear, where he was a lot angrier and more prone to violence than he would later evolve into in later years. The general premise remained the same, however, as his nearsightedness caused him to mistake his nephew Waldo for a bear. The character first started as a satire on Joseph McCarthy and others of his ilk by screenwriter Millard Kaufman and former Disney animators John Hubley and Willis Pyle. Jim Backus, the voice of Magoo, would mumble remarks under his breath, ranting about society and the younger generation, which actually still makes the short relevant to today. However, this aspect of Magoo was softened, and the short became less mean-spirited, primarily under the direction of Peter Burness. The whole idea of Magoo's nearsightedness wasn't to make fun of people with that condition. Magoo was just too proud and stubborn to wear his spectacles, despite the insistence of those around him, including his neighbors. What allowed the Mr. Magoo cartoons to remain fresh is how Burness and the rest of the UPA team put him into all sorts of different situations involving a wide array of characters. It's particularly funny seeing the story get crazier and more outlandish. In the Oscar-winning short, When Magoo Flew, it starts off with the simple premise of Magoo wanting to go to the movies. Instead, he winds up on an airline flight and thinks it's a 3D presentation. Through it all is a hilarious subplot with a secret agent pursuing a suspect, and this gets tangled up in Magoo's storyline as he tries to return the man's briefcase and ends up in all sections of the airplane. Sometimes the people around him are affected by his adventures, but there are other shorts where it's through their own fault. His next-door neighbor is aware Magoo is nearsighted and continually tells him to wear his prescriptions. And yet, for some reason, she decides to have him play a role in her opera, and naturally, antics ensue. However, Magoo's actions don't come out of some sort of malice. In one surprisingly touching short, he mistakes a burglar for a dog, and we see him genuinely care for him as if he was his own pup. There's humor to the burglar trying to avoid the policeman catching him, while Magoo is unaware of it all. Then there's Waldo, who sometimes is not the brightest, and in other shorts is merely unable to get a word in edgewise. Magoo is also headstrong about his beliefs. He feels very strongly about his alma mater, Rutgers, and continually cheers for them. Owing to his wealth, he is also pro-capitalism, and this is best shown in a short where he mistakes the horse tracks for the bank and continually gives speeches about the importance of investment, which somehow leads to him continually betting on the right horse. There's also a short in which we encounter Magoo's elderly mother, and seeing her react to her son's continued attempt to feed her is hilarious, as well as when she starts concocting a plan to get him to leave her alone. The production of the theatrical Mr. Magoo shorts ended in 1959, the same year UPA made their first feature film, 1001 Arabian Nights. This was largely a fairly straight adaptation of the Aladdin story, with Magoo inserted in there, and it's quite an amusing one. Aladdin and the princess's storyline follows the expected beats, and while Magoo is largely a supporting character, he provides some funny moments. However, the surprising scene stealer ends up being the Grand Vizier, voiced by Hans Conried. His continued attempts to get the magical lamp, while also pretending to be Magoo's long-lost brother, are hilarious, and Conried gives the role his all. While I was mostly chuckling at Magoo's antics, the Vizier is what made me howl with laughter. The UPA animation suited him perfectly, and the timing is great. One can also see a bit of an influence on Disney's more famous and arguably better take on Aladdin here. If you can find a copy of it, it's worth giving a look. In 1960, Mr. Magoo made the transition to television, and while the animation took an obvious downgrade from UPA's theatrical shorts, the humor was still there, along with the unusual decision to give Magoo a Chinese houseboy. Oh, those 1960s standards. It was a different time then. But let's move on to Christmas Carol. In 1962, NBC aired Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol, widely considered the first holiday television special. The most surprising element of this special is that there is not much humor surrounding Magoo's nearsightedness, with most of the gags appearing primarily at the beginning and end. It's actually a fairly straightforward take on the Dickens story, and because it would be out of character for Magoo to suddenly start acting like Ebenezer Scrooge, they have him perform A Christmas Carol on Broadway to justify it. Overall, it's quite a decent special, with some solid songs, and UPA having a speaking Gerald McBoing Boing as Tiny Tim was a nice touch. The popularity of this special led to the famous adventures of Mr. Magoo, which continued the idea of Magoo performing in stage productions of famous literary stories. Magoo would appear on and off in animated series, specials, and commercials over the years, but in 1997 he made his big comeback in a live-action movie from the Walt Disney Company. The reason this sounds odd is because the co-creators of Mr. Magoo were not only former Disney animators, but were accused by Walt Disney himself of being communists. Well, in this case, Columbia was probably thanking the stars Disney made this instead. The thing with Mr. Magoo is he's a character who works better animated and in small doses. Even in 1001 Arabian Nights, he was not the main character. In the live-action Mr. Magoo movie, the gags get old really quickly, and it does not help that the slapstick was just weak. Slapstick is a somewhat underappreciated form of comedy, which, with the right timing and execution, can be hilarious. In the 90s, slapstick reached an age where the success of Home Alone bred some of the worst and most unfunny slapstick comedy imaginable, and Mr. Magoo is chock full of these. Thrown in here is also a jewel heist plot that's not the least bit exciting. Also, when Magoo unintentionally got other people hurt in the cartoons, it was funny. Here, because we're watching real people, it's not quite as charming. There are a number of points where Magoo comes dangerously close to killing people in some freak accident. Even with the best efforts of Leslie Nielsen, this just did not work. It would take a number of years before Magoo returned, this time in Kung Fu Magoo, an animated film made by the same Mexican studio who made the recent Top Cat movies. Otherwise, Mr. Magoo is a character nobody's really interested in reviving. At the moment, the now Universal-owned Classic Media owns the rights along with Columbia Pictures, and I'm not sure they're gung-ho about bringing him back. Nonetheless, I think Quincy Magoo has more than proven himself a classic cartoon star, and I, for one, enjoy his classic animated antics. See you next time.